I'm worried you're going to neuroscience me. I'm trying to get to...
I'm no neuroscientist, Felix.
Right, but you've hung around them enough.
Yeah, I've hung around them.
to get their sort of judgy...
with permission.
Picking into my brain concept. That's why I was worried about having you on the show, so that you'd overanalyze me. But
tell me about what happened when you were growing up, Felix.
I'll get onto that after the Greek debt crisis.
Yeah.
Before I lose it in my head.
Yeah.
Can you just talk me through the dichotomy you were talking about between action and intention?
Well, I think 99. This is a spurious statistic.
We only have spurious statistics.
I only have them to hand. 99% of people do not intend to come to work and have a terrible impact on others.
This episode is brought to you by Instant Impact. Instant Impact provides transformative talent solutions to small and mid-sized companies that are making between 30 and 500 hires each year. If your recruitment's giving you a headache and you don't know where to start, then give the team at Instant Impact a call or visit www.instant-impact.com for more information. Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. I'd wager that very few of us have ever thought about how we act in conversations. Fewer still about why we act in certain ways. But we've all had the experience of being drawn to someone or easily persuaded or even put off by something that we can't explain. It's all very interesting, and I think it's fair to say that I am super excited to introduce our next guest, Steve Weiner. And he's going to lead us into an adventure exploring the neuroscience of conversation. Steve is managing director at SW Learning. He's a trained lawyer, an ex-learning and development lead. He's an author and an advisor to more businesses and organizations than I can fit into this pithy introduction. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, did I miss anything in the intro? Is there anything that's sort of relevant for our conversation? How do you sort of categorize yourself in a professional conversation?
Good question. I think until relatively recently, there was this whole business around being trainers, people going to business and train. And I always found that a bit uncomfortable, this idea that you'd go in, because you're not the expert when you go into these businesses. You are facilitating thoughts. So you're there to create a space and facilitate. Often talk about, in a professional context, I'm there to paint the dots, and it's for them to join the dots. Whereas in the old days, people go in and say, if you're in this situation, these are the 5 things you should do to be assertive or to whatever it might be. So I like to think, it sounds really pretentious, I like to think I'm a facilitator rather than any kind of expert trying to teach, which I think is a wrong thing. But I bring lots of sort of angles in. I used to be an actor as well. So I gave up being a lawyer to become an actor. So I sort of had a real interest in that gap between intention and impact at that time. So that gap, we judge ourselves on our intention and everyone else on their impact. That always resonated because I always thought, gosh, isn't that an interesting sort of dichotomy that you're looking at the gap, judging people on how they come across, but actually most of the time at work, people aren't looking behind the impact to understand the intention. So that is an area of real interest for me.
That's fascinating. And we were introduced by a mutual friend who sang your praises as a facilitator, I think it's fair to say. And what she was saying is that you bring quite a lot of your experience as an actor into your facilitations sessions. Yeah.
Although I sort of think that the acting stuff in of itself, because I'm not a formally trained actor, I went through the performance comedy and improv route, but I did it professionally, very successfully, and I'm not an actor, so I don't like. I've got a bit of, I suppose, it's just a personal thing, bit of a problem with the acty stuff in of itself, because most people, especially the people I'm working with at a certain level, they don't have time to be told how to breathe properly. Now, I'm saying there absolutely is a place for that, but that for me isn't where I think I add value, and where I think at the moment, especially in the current climate, you can add value to a senior leadership team or to a board because they're too busy for it.
I think that's fair, and only getting busier and busier. So
busier, yeah.
before I lose it in my head,
yeah,
can you just talk me through the dichotomy you were talking about between action and intention?
Well, I think 99. This is a spurious statistic.
We only have spurious statistics.
I only
on
have
this
them
show.
to hand. 99% of people do not intend to come to work and have a terrible impact on others. Right? I don't think there are many people that come to work looking to upset others, apart from the corporate psychopaths and the sociopaths. But we can put them to one side and say that most people are have good intention at work. But a lot of those people have poor impact. Mm-hmm. So we forget that if I look at someone who, let's say, because we're talking about conversations, really terrible at having a conversation about how I'm doing at work. And I think they don't turn up on time. They're looking at their phone when they turn up. They have no idea how to listen. They're self-interested and self-oriented. They're really clumsy and clunky with their language. I don't think they intend for that to be the case. But nevertheless, that is their impact. So the work to be done with them is to help close their gap between intention and impact. But the work to be done with the people who are on the receiving end of it is to help them understand that, okay, so I can be triggered by that behaviour, but actually I'm going to look behind that and I'm going to use some skills to unpick what's going on behind that impact. And that's the intention. That for me is the interesting bit. Less so the impact.
Great. Sorry, I said action. I meant impact. So it's impact and intention.
Two
key
That's
key
what I
words
think.
there.
And it feels a bit reductive to say that everything comes down to that. But I do think outside the technical skill at work, outside the ability to do your job, the gap between intention and impact is where pretty much all of it goes wrong.
And how do you close that gap then? How do we get behind the impact and spend a little bit more time focusing on the intention?
Well, I think there's a number of things. I mean, if you read some of those core texts on emotional intelligence, the first cornerstone is self-awareness. So fine. So increasing self-awareness, asking people at work, what was my impact in that meeting? How am I doing in this kind of conversations? And that in terms of status, senior to junior, how amazing if you can say with genuine curiosity and interest, how did that come across? I was really intending for this conversation to be about you. Did I hijack it or whatever it might be? That's the first bit, self-awareness. And the other bit is self-regulation, which is linked to self-awareness, because if I notice that certain situations trigger me, then I can be prepared for mitigating a risk against the risk of my trigger behaviours derailing a conversation. But again, it comes down to that. Was it Susan Scott who wrote? She's got that book, Fierce.
Fierce Conversations.
Yeah, and she says everything comes down to, call it leadership, one conversation at a time. So you can think about all these arcane concepts, but ultimately, that conversation on Monday morning with that difficult colleague is the stuff that preoccupies me. Not how do I become an inspirational leader, because that feels a bit sort of nebulous.
How do you think then? I guess what's the secret to those sorts of conversations? So let's unpick that sort of senior to junior conversation you're having. You think one of your juniors is I don't know, they need to improve their meeting skills, for example, the skills with clients in a meeting.
Right.
And you're having a conversation with them about that. What are we talking about here? Are we talking about a set of skills that you need to learn on as a leader so you have a toolkit? Or are you talking about being much more prepared for those meetings, taking 15, 20 minutes to really think it through before you sit down with your team member? How do we progress from that lack of, I guess, how do we improve those conversations we're having?
Well, again, it's an art, right? It's not a science. And none of us are perfect at conversations. That's because the perfect conversation doesn't exist. It's anyone who comes into a business and says, today we're doing difficult conversations training. And at the end of this, you're all going to know how to have a difficult conversation. I mean, what nonsense. This is a personal opinion. What nonsense is that, right? Because it's not a difficult conversation, it's just a conversation. So the first point is to recognise that not all conversations are as important as other conversations. So at work, the conversation you just talked about, someone who is consistently not performing that's a horrible term, someone who is just really obviously underconfident in those situations, and you want to help them because they have to get better to progress. That's a high stakes conversation. So the first place we always say to start is purpose, because at the moment, and I think post-pandemic as well, the purposeless catch-up has become a problem again. We all love a catch-up. Everyone loves a catch-up. Let's have a catch-up for 15 minutes. I'll stick something in the diary. And it's purposeless. You turn up, you might be a bit late, maybe even a couple of minutes late. But then once you've done that, once there's no purpose, then the drive from the conversation disappears. The motivation to actually achieve something in conversation. So it's about, I always say to people, firstly identify, is this a really important conversation? If it is important, then you have to have a purpose for it. And the purpose needs to be a genuine purpose, and a purpose that can be achieved in a conversation. Last week we were working with some partners in a law firm, and we were going around saying, because they all identify one conversation they want to work on in this workshop. We talked about this one. We said, what's the purpose of your conversation? He said, it's to improve their performance. So I don't think he liked it, but I said, that's a nonsense. That is a nonsense purpose. And he said, why is it a nonsense purpose? I want to. And of course the question is, can you achieve that in one conversation? The answer is no, you can't. So actually we alighted upon, after some work, the purpose for that conversation was to find out what happened 2 nights ago when that individual delivered work really late, and it meant that the partner had to cancel that client meeting, and the client was really, really cross. So the purpose for this conversation is just find out what happened on that evening, and then go from there for a next conversation. So you don't have to achieve everything in one. So I think that's the first place, is purpose, because we seem to have lost purpose, I think, in terms of conversational intelligence.
Yes. I'm pretty sure quite a few listeners will find themselves resonating with that. I think I probably fall into both camps, the under planning what I want to get out of each conversation sometimes, and then sometimes trying to get too much out of 15 minutes, half an hour, even an hour, right? Having unrealistic expectations of that meeting.
But you have good intention.
Quite.
You have good intention. So then we come back to the same point. How do I manage to close the gap between my intention and impact? And then it does come down to some skills. I say skills. There are some skills, but also mindset going into these things.
So we've spoken about, I guess, imbuing your meetings with purpose. What are the toolkits? What are some of the other skills that that people leave your sessions with once they've worked with you for a bit? They get better at purpose. They get better at sort of self-awareness, that difference between intention and impact. What are the other hallmarks of a great conversationalist? Well,
again, we'll paint the dots for them. We wouldn't say this is how you do this particular thing.
Of course, I understand.
And I being pedantic, but I think it's important that I think learning development now is so much more sophisticated in terms of people's learning expectations and learning cynicism as well. They come into a workshops, whatever that means, much shorter. So you have to get the return on investment up for the time. So I think the skills, again, the mindset piece, was it Nancy Klein's book, Time to Think, which I love. And I love so much because I have a problem with an imposter syndrome. So I go and qualify in as much as I possibly can, just to make myself feel I care about myself. There's an existential position there. But I went to qualify in Nancy Klein's Time to Think organisation around facilitating what she calls the thinking environment, which is how her hypothesis, and again this links to conversations, the quality of our action of work depends on the quality of our thinking. The quality of our thinking depends on the quality of the listening we experience. And the quality of the listening depends on how well the listener makes the listenee feel like they matter. So, do I matter in this conversation? And then she said, and that's great, listening's great, but it's not, in of itself, it's not enough. So you've got to combine listening with incisive questions, is what she calls them. She's trademarked that, incisive questions. So
you trademark incisive
questions? Yeah, we can't talk about it because I don't want to receive her. So cease and desist. Be a really disappointing end to this podcast. But listening with incisive questions, that sort of that partnership, and if I can then then take those two things. Curiosity kills conflict. So curiosity, and then shining the torch on the person I'm having the conversation with, and then people start to realise, oh, yeah, there are actually. I'm now starting to see that there is a difference, but not all conversations are equal. There is a difference between the catch up, the little quick conversation I have in the quick conversation I have in the hallway, versus that high stakes conversation I've got to have where this person is really struggling.
Do you think, and I'm not necessarily talking about the workplace here, but I worry that we as humans are getting worse at listening and understanding other perspectives. If you look at the elections that we had last year here in the UK, or the US elections in November, it feels to me like there is such a skills gap or a will gap when it comes to trying to understand where someone else is coming from and why they think a certain way. Do you come across that in your professional work at all?
Yeah, I do. But to your point, personal life as well. I mean, listen, for me, deep listening is such a premium. It's very rare, isn't it? Even with your mates, that you receive really, really good quality sort of listening. Like the torch is just shining entirely on you. It's very rare. And that is because we're encouraged, I think to Nancy Klein's work, we're encouraged to action before thinking. So let's just keep doing, and then stuff will happen. But yeah, I mean, I 100% think that the sort of, and the world of improv, where I experience from the sort of the yes and yes but piece.
You're saying that as if I should know what it is.
yeah, I'm assuming you know. Like this idea that we live in yes but, I've got a better idea. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but maybe we should think about versus the yes, and I love what you're saying, and maybe we should think also about, so accept and build versus accept and reject, because actually yes but is received as no.
It is.
Yeah. So I'll often hear after the but, I won't hear the yes bit. Whereas yes and it sounds, again, really sort of semantic stuff, but there is a mindset piece to it. I think society, what I'm seeing is that yes but is just, that's the automatic pilot.
I always find it interesting when people apologise for semantic stuff when words are so important.
Words are so important, that's true. Yeah, you're right.
And
I take that back.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I bloody think
Apology
you should.
withdrawn. I shall never apologise for that again.
Just like the royal family. God, I was going to say the Queen there. That's not good. The King. What is it? So if you're in this yes and yes, the sort of accept and build mentality.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be interested. I've actually never seen an improv show before, but what is? I've seen it within. This sounds quite meta now. I've seen it within a I don't know, like a movie. So I think I get the broad concept. Yeah. But what does it do when you move from a yes but to a yes conversation or even workplace?
Well, one of my best friends, who is one of the world's best improvisers, Pippa Evans, and Pippa, this isn't a plug for Pippa, but she's an amazing woman. She set up Showstoppers, the improvised musical. She's one of the sort of founding members. They improvise a musical from scratch every night.
Really? For the music and everything?
Everything. It's insane.
That's nuts.
She's an insane talent, and so I work with her often. We go into businesses and we'll help people change the mindset around accept and build. And she's always very clear on this. She talks about the fact there is a perfect place for yes but. There is a place for it. Yeah, I know you want to go to that venue, but we don't have that money in the budget. Yes but. But the problem is that bleeds into other areas. Because there's this idea of the advice monster sitting on our shoulder, always wanting to find solutions and get to action. So it's jumping in at all times to try and come up, sort of reduce ambiguity and create certainty, of course. Mm-hmm. We know that the neuroscience shows that need for certainty is there. So she talks about the fact we've just got to be deliberate about it. And is this a conversation that requires yes and a mindset and a behaviour? Or actually, no, this is a yes but conversation, that's fine. Or is this a no conversation? Or it's an entirely just yes. What a brilliant idea. Being deliberate, bringing intentionality to it. I think that is a really important point. Again, comes to purpose, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yes, and it does.
Yeah. See? Magic.
And so I guess there are themes, right? So I guess there are themes of conversation. You're in a, if you're I'm worried you're going to neuroscience me. I'm trying to get to.
I'm no neuroscientist, Felix.
Right, but you've hung around them enough.
Yeah, I've hung around them
to get their sort of judgy.
With permission.
Picking into my brain concept. That's why I was worried about having you on the show, that you'd overanalyze me. But
tell me about what happened when you were growing up, Felix.
Oh, I'll get onto that after the Greek debt crisis.
Yeah.
So you've got your yes and conversations. Presumably, some of those, there are environments where that's more suitable.
Yeah.
So creative conversations.
Exactly.
Listening to people's intentions at work. What are the? Could you just give us examples for each of the kinds of conversations, just to help us put it into context?
Yeah, I mean, again, we come back to high stakes conversations at work. So let's go back to our example right at the start. I think you said you've got a junior colleague, they're struggling just with confidence, and you want to help them. Now, the advice monster is saying, I've done this for 24 years. So I know exactly what they should do to be more confident, and I'm going to tell them they should be more confident. That feels very much like a yes but conversation and a yes but mindset. I hear you're confident, but what I need you to do is be more confident. Just speak up a bit more. That kind of. Whereas the yes and stuff is all about, again, curiosity. I'm sensing that you're finding these kind of meetings difficult. I noticed last week when we agreed you were going to present that piece of research back to the client, that in the end you seemed reticent and I jumped in. I apologise for jumping in. Today I really want to explore what happened and to try and come up with some kind of action plan for improving your confidence in those situations. So tell me what happened. So it's that's a real yes and mindset. And I think, again, we've got to think, is this person going to benefit from me shining a torch on them? Because that's a yes and sort of mindset. I'm really just giving them, I'm here for them. In the neuroscience, in neuroleadership, they talk about relatedness. So I'm friend, not foe. I'm on your side. So it's not me versus you. I'm the manager. You're the junior colleague. We're both sitting in a room together. We're exploring this situation and I want to help. How can I do it? But I'm not going to tell you, because that's the advice monster sitting on the shoulder saying, just tell them out. You know the right answer. So just tell them what to do. And some of that is sort of, I hate to use this word, but existential. So I'm really interested in sort of psychodynamics. So how do I relate to myself in these situations as a junior colleague and as a senior colleague? And how does that impact on someone's ability to take responsibility and ownership for their own development?
It's just a very interesting turn of phrase at the end, how you get someone to take responsibility for their own development, because I feel like a lot of leaders and actually a lot of L&D professionals don't see that as the right answer, in that a leader will say, I am responsible for developing my own team, I'm responsible for developing my own juniors. An L&D professional will say, I've got to up the skill level in the organisation. Right. This is my gig. But it does feel like the way of thinking is moving towards, I guess, self-driven learning, autodidacts, people pushing their own development with the assistance of leaders and with the assistance of professionals. Is that how you see? Is that inaccurate? Am I right there? Or am I just
well, I mean, I don't know what's right, but that resonates hugely for me, because, again, painting the dots. I'll often start a workshop by saying, look, this is about you, it's not me. I don't use, and I don't want to get into the sort of workshop aspect of this. It sounds like me telling you what I do, but I don't use PowerPoint because I think PowerPoint sends a message. There's nothing wrong with PowerPoint, by the way. It sends a message in what I do, that I've got the answers and they're on a slide. And when you read that, you'll have the answers, which is, again, nonsense. And I often say to people, it's a bit like a nightclub. I'm going to give you loads of different things. It's going to be one in, one out with you in terms of what you keep and what you just dump from your head. That's a really tenuous analogy, isn't it?
I was going to say, it's been a while since I've been to a nightclub, Steve. But...
I spend all my time in nightclubs. Yeah, hard house. And I don't really know what that means. One in, one out, what I mean is, if you like what we're telling you, like we're giving you a piece of research from an interesting neuroscientist who linked up some people to MRI scanners and they noticed X, Y, and Z. If you like that, that's great. I mean, that in of itself's not useful, but if the skill that comes out of that's useful for you, go off and have a go. And if it doesn't work for you, dump it. Don't waste. You've got enough going on in your head that you don't need loads of theories swashing around. So we're going to give you a dashboard of loads of different things. I've got loads of qualifications. I've gone and done loads of research and worked with thousands of people, but that's not useful. That's only useful for me. That's not useful for you as a participant. So it's about, I think, to your point, people are so much more, I think since post-pandemic, needing or requiring of purpose in development. I don't want to just go and do a sheep dip. I don't want to go and sit in a room for a day with 150 PowerPoint slides and then someone comes out and says, did you do that work on becoming more assertive? Yeah, I'm definitely more assertive now. Oh, that's good. Well done. Well, that's time well spent then. It's not time well spent. Sort of sheep dip stuff.
I guess from my own experience of being trained, I definitely, a lot of that resonates. I'm not a very good classroom trained person, but I do like some frameworks. I do like a sort
Definitely.
Because that helps me it helps the knowledge stick in my brain.
Yeah, you're a clever guy.
Yeah.
So there is, but that's an important thing, isn't it? The intellectual rigor. So the people we work with, and I work with a lot of lawyers and a lot of US lawyers who have it drilled into them at a very early age that intellectual credibility is extremely important. Mm. So for them to display, but also when they're working with people, they're very quickly, they're going into threat or reward based on whether I think that person's clever. So we have to, when we go into, we have to play the game a bit. And say play the game, we have to be qualified. So I'm big on qualifications, but I also think it's really important. If you go in somewhere, you should be an expert, have some expertise, not an expert, have some expertise in the areas that you are working in. Not because you can then tell people what to do, but then they know that you know, and they know that if they ask you a challenging question, you've got it all under the hood. I can go into the detail of it if I need to. Mm. So I think there's that intellectual credibility, and that's where the sort of neuro-leadership aspect comes in, because there's nothing more rigorous than, or at least there's nothing more rigorous than the neuroscience of threat and reward. And as they say, the Neuro-Leadership Institute, this idea of navigating away from threat and into rewarding conversations. So that's hard stuff. I mean, there's no...
Yeah, I'm sure it is, and it's such an interesting area. Truth be told, neuroscience makes me a little uncomfortable. Yeah. It sort of pokes at that area of thought that I try not to let my thoughts go into, which is that I'm not as in control of things as I would ever like. The moment you're getting into different areas of your brain being stimulated in certain conversations and different chemicals in your brain making you act certain ways, it all feels pretty ones and zeros.
Well, I think I said it. I'm not a neuroscientist. I have a real interest in it, and I think you're right. I think that. So then you've got to think, what can we take from this that's useful, and a lot of that is around some of the basic. I think you've got to keep it basic. Mm. The brain knows no difference between physical and emotional threat, for example. So if I get an email that says, just a little example, and the title is feedback from my manager, and it says, "Hi Steve, I've put 15 minutes in your diary at 2 p.m. to give you some feedback on Project Blade. See you then." My immediate response is...
Project Blade is a cool name for a project.
Yeah, that is a cool name for a project. That was the immediate response. And I'm getting sacked. Mm. So it was a great project. And I put that on my CV because it's a cool name. And I won't be working in that organisation anymore because obviously the feedback is bad. So they talk about feedback being what they call a neuro-trigger word, as an example.
Is it really?
So that for me is a really interesting thing, because people say, "What are you supposed to call it then, mate? What are you supposed to call feedback?" I said, "Why do you have to use the word feedback? Why couldn't you say, I'd like to have a conversation around your performance on X, Y, and Z when we were working together on Project Blade last week? Or go and have a face-to-face conversation with them. Don't send them a meeting request that says feedback. So that stuff for me is useful. But the arcane stuff, I think that's best for the neuroscientists.
So Steve, I can't believe it. We are coming up to time on the podcast. You know that people don't have the attention span that they used to. But we've spoken about what people get wrong in the workplace, and we've spoken about how to improve there. Can you think of something that we do well in the workplace as humans that we could bring into our personal lives to make them better?
That's a tough one. Something we do well in the workplace that we could bring into our personal lives.
Yeah.
Well, I think that is a difficult one because, of course, and I don't want to be unnecessarily challenging, but of course everyone's personal life looks different and everyone's workplace looks different. I think I'm sort of flipping this a bit, but the best professionals I work with are the curious ones. And so it comes back to, again, curiosity. So I haven't answered your question at all.
That's fine. You can change it. You can change it as you will. This is as much your podcast as it is mine.
Well, thanks. And so I would say, and again, a sort of bit of evangelical about it. Curiosity is the one thing that we seem to have lost in the workplace, and I think post-pandemic, because people are under so much pressure, and because there's time together is such a premium, isn't it? Face to face in an office, talking with people, that becomes high pressure, and we've lost the ability to be curious because I think the advice monster has taken over. And so I think if there's one thing, and I know that one thing that we can do I certainly know my wife, my relationship, completely transformed when I learnt how to not give solutions and just listen. Listen, as my friend Pippa Evans says, listening to ignite rather than listening to interrupt, which is such an important thing. But people go on courses where they're taught how to listen actively by making noises like which is not unsavoury, for one, and two, it's not listening, right? That's focusing on making noises. Listening requires a huge amount of effort, and curiosity requires effort. So I think if we could definitely have that, bring some more curiosity, and there are some skills you can use, but most of it, I hate to say it, from the world of stand-up comedy, you don't learn anything from a good gig. So you learn the most from a bad conversation. But it's having the ability to, after that conversation, to go off and think, crikey, what was it that I did well, and what could I do more and less of, or what could I do better? That's the bit that people don't know. That went badly. I'll just consign that to the bin and then start again next time. Whereas wouldn't it be great if we had some ability to reflect meaningful on conversations, which I think would transform workplaces, or conversational intelligence, as Judith Glaser called it in her book, Conversational Intelligence, which is another book I love, and transform the ability to have intimate relationships at home as well, which are focused on me giving rather than just taking.
What a fantastic answer to a question I didn't ask. Steve, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been really fun.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.